Welcome again to Hidden Truths, and today we have Josh Barone, who is going to speak about environmental, social, and corporate governance, also known as ESG. Hi, Josh. How's everything going?
Everything's wonderful. How about yourself?
Great. Beautiful day in paradise.
Yeah, that's what they say. Hopefully it snows here pretty soon.
That's right. So anyway, tell us, ESG sounds like it's making headlines.
Yeah, it has. It's strange because we were talking about it in a previous podcast recently, and I think maybe that made me a little bit more aware of what was going on. But you have several states out there passing anti-ESG legislation, and so I dug into what was going on here, and it's actually fairly interesting. The U.S. Labor Department is changing the definition of fiduciary. And why that's interesting is essentially most states, and we're really talking about pensions here, pension funds, large pension, state pensions. But what happens is most states just copy and paste the Department of Labor's definitions and put it into their own state definitions. So by the idea that the Department of Labor is changing the definition of fiduciary, and what that means has got, basically they've got all these states up in roar, and they're all stepping away from that copy and paste methodology and coming up with their own legitimate state methodology of this is what a fiduciary is. We're really talking about employee retirement plans here, 401ks, pensions. This is what this stuff affects. We're not really talking about being a fiduciary in the role of an investment advisor, but it's somewhat similar. And so why this is important, the DOL and ERISA, there's the Employment Retirement Income Security Act 74, or ERISA rules. They essentially adopt the same thing the DOL is. And by law, so say I do something in a 401k account and the participant doesn't like what I did, and we go to court. These best standards, the definition of fiduciary, is what they use as what they call best practices in the industry. And so by changing this law, and again, this law is sitting on President Biden's desk to be changed, you really affect a lot of things, especially money-wise. So let me just put it this way. ESG is not really all that prominent in retirement accounts because of these fiduciary rules. And so only 3% of 401ks have ESG investing type. And I think less than 1% of all IRAs have ESG in them.
That's a very, very low percentage. That's surprising.
Yeah, so they really haven't penetrated the retirement accounts. And this is why. What does the fiduciary rule say? Essentially, current fiduciary rule says that you have to do what's in the client's best interest financially. And so that means if I'm working in a 401k, especially at a pension level, I have to put the client in or the pension into a company or an investment that benefits the individual financially. And that means money. So the new definition is that the fiduciary law says that you don't have to benefit the client financially, but if you do it along of that, it helps improve society in some way in terms of social governance and environmental, then that's a new standard for that investment type. You can see why, especially a state like Texas, who's throwing a huge fit about this, is not really happy about this law being passed.
Yeah, I can see that. Texas pensions, right? What's the amount of money that's in the Texas pensions?
So Texas is, you're talking about $357 billion, that's with the B, just in Texas. And Texas is the model state for this because of what ESG does to, and we talked about this in the last blog, to the energy sector. It essentially throws out the energy sector and says it's essentially not an investable asset anymore. What's in Texas? Energy companies, right? Natural gas, oil companies. And so the idea that they're going to change the way that their pensions work in terms of fiduciary rule Texas said basically, no, we're not going to do that. We passed our own fiduciary rule that passed in September of 2001. And in August this year, they came up with the blacklist of companies that the Texas pensions will not do business with. One of those, and this is why it made news, is BlackRock. BlackRock being the largest asset manager in the world, I think. And they basically said, look, if you're going to blackball the energy sector, then why would I have my state's pensions invest in that type of investing? You're hurting the state and hurting the employees that I represent. So basically, you had this whole law came about from a Texas Public Policy Foundation, and there's this guy, Dr. Brent Bennett, and this is a quote, so I'm going to read it off this piece of paper. But this is what he said. He said, we are now seeing major banks and investment firms colluding to deny financing and investment into energy companies. However, one solution is to turn the tables on the banks. If they will not do business with us, we won't do business with them. And that's the basis of this anti-ESG law going through Texas. That was last year. So what happened now and why this really came forward is Missouri and Louisiana just passed similar legislation and really directed at BlackRock. Missouri is 500 billion in pension assets, and Louisiana is 795 billion. I rounded that in assets. And they're saying the same thing. They're basically saying, this is the treasurer of Missouri claiming, hey, if BlackRock is prioritizing ESG over shareholder returns, then we have a big problem because current fiduciary law says you're not allowed to do that. And so guess what? We're going to pull our pension funds from that company.
Oh, wow. So then there are states that have anti-ESG policies, right? How many are there?
Excluding in Louisiana, there's 13 other states that have passed some form of anti-ESG legislation. You're at 15 states right now. And it looks like it's going to take more effect. But again, once the law changes, who knows what that opens anything up. There is the other side of this too. So there are some states going the opposite way, such as New York. And New York is upset with BlackRock again, which you can see the underlying bank here. And New York's upset because they're saying BlackRock is trying to appease these other states by saying they're not involved in, they do lend to fossil fuel companies. And New York's saying, well, if you lend to fossil fuel companies, then you're not ESG, and we're going to kick you out of our pro-ESG policy. And so bye-bye BlackRock. It's somewhat interesting. And what I do find funny in this whole thing is BlackRock's chief executive officer, Larry Fink, is saying he must be doing something right because he's being attacked by both sides equally. And it's funny to me.
Lots of controversy on that topic.
Yeah, and the SEC is getting involved here. The SEC is looking at why are these people doing this to BlackRock. Essentially, they're saying it's becoming confusing what real ESG fundamentals are and what aren't. So we're going to pass a rule about, essentially, they call it the greenwashing rule, that you can't just say things unless you actually back them up in terms of doing these projects, because that is confusing to the average Joe investor like me. What else is funny is there was actual protest yesterday inside of BlackRock corporate offices, their main office, where people were saying exactly what the people in New York were saying, probably because their office is in New York, that why are you lending to fossil fuel companies? That's not ESG. You can't have it both ways. That's the update. That's where we are. But the main takeaway here is that essentially they're rejiggering what a fiduciary means. I don't know if I'm okay with that. I could see why the ESG industry wants that. Essentially, they could say, guess what? Now you have a right to invest in a company that doesn't make money and doesn't do anything and isn't going to provide financial support to your constituency. But hey, it's a good idea because it's good for the environment. So throw our industry money, but don't give it to the fossil fuel industry because that would be bad. Like everything in this world, after you change the rule and allow for this other stuff, how does that get perverted down the road into other investments? I just don't see how, from being a fiduciary for so many years, how this is a great idea in terms of that. I get ESG investing and I don't mind it, but the idea behind ESG is essentially that it's a more efficient way to allocate capital. So the idea that somehow that goes against profitability and doing something good for the constituency in terms of financial means, it's just a little bit like, why do you need this? If the basic premise of ESG investing is alive and well, then this is moot and point. But
there are lots of gray areas, and they're playing with people's emotions, especially people that truly do not understand exactly what's behind ESG, right? So this is why it seems to be very popular in certain areas. They play with it. They know what works. They know how to reach people's emotions in a way that's not always ethical.
Yeah, I think you hit it. The growth of ESG is so large and so rapid. I don't think Wall Street thought it was going to grow this fast. Now they're seeing, hey, how do we extend this growth? And let's get into these pensions and 401k and retirements accounts and allow more choice, maybe less choice, depends on how you look at it, but maybe force some of these people, some of these fiduciaries, state fiduciaries, to put money into ESG. With a lot of anti-ESG litigation or changes in law, where does that put the DOL at this point when people aren't accepting its rules? And now it's, again, you get this state versus federal government kind of clash. And how does that work out through the court systems? It'll be interesting to watch forward how this all takes effect and plays out through the industry.
What I know is I'm really happy that you're taking care of this for me. This way I don't have to learn about what's happening with ESG, because it is complicated for most people that just have a hard time making decisions that seem to be based on real data or on non-fake news. And that's the challenge as well. So when you are living and breathing what you're doing day in, day out, it makes a big difference. I think you develop a more realistic understanding of what truly is going on so that you can advise your clients in the right direction.
Yeah, you hit it, that there's too much information these days. The way you get through too much information is through data science, right? If you can quantify it, then you can look at it with computers in several different ways. It's part of the problem here that there isn't enough data. Forcing companies to give this data isn't something that's forthright either. A little bit on the young side still. And as we go through as a data researcher, as this data comes out, we'll be able to really test the premise of whether this does make companies more efficient and whether investing this way is a great idea. It's a little bit unproven and untested, and until that data really comes, and then we can derive the fake from the real and move forward.
Great, wonderful information as usual. Thank you so much. There's so much information that can be found on ESG, but we have to make sure that we grab that information from safe places.
Yes, you always question the source of things. That's what we do here daily.
Great, thank you so much, Josh. For everyone else, if you want to watch all our videos and check our podcasts and our blogs, visit hiddentruths.today. We save everything there. We film a video and record a podcast every week. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.